risk assessment, these are the people who are looking at who are trying to assess the safety of the technologies that you are developing. I know there are so many scientists in this room. I think they have already overwhelmed the regulators. So the regulators are basically, they are not a stumbling block, but basically they are people trying to see the technologies that you are developing before they are deployed to the human populations. Those technologies are safe. But when you look at the comparison between crops and animals, there's so much advancement in applications of modern biotech in crops. I think the research on GM animals is trying to pick up, although in a slow pace. So far, I think 2 animals already released compared to crops. Crops we have in excess of 30 crops, genetically modified. When you look at the space of animals, we are only talking about the salmon fish and also the mosquito. I think Oxitec was here yesterday. They were able to articulate the mosquito that has been released in Brazil, and I think now proceeding to, is it Paraguay? I heard about Paraguay. When it comes to risk assessment, as a general principle, it's basically the science that involves the identification and evaluation of potential risks. Potential risks, they may not be little risk, but basically it's a process of identifying anything that could go wrong in your technologies that you are developing. And any technology, whether you are developing planes, whether you are developing cars, whether you are developing phones, any technology comes with the potential risks. So in the context of GMO, the role of regulators is to ensure that that technology that is new meets the both international and national standards of safety. There are basically 4 principles of risk assessment. I think you have gone through this in the past. It is a science-based process. It is a science that also employs what we call the precautionary principle, that if information is not there, you can take a back seat as you look for more information, or you can provide for containment measures before full deployment of that technology. So the other principle is what we call the comparative. You want to assess the risks of that GM versus the non-modified counterpart. If you have, for example, modified Anopheles mosquito, you can't compare that mosquito with another species of mosquito. It has to be comparative. You compare it's apple for apple. That's what we're calling by comparative assessment. At the last, it's a case by case. You can't make a judgment on a risk assessment that was done on another organism whose receiving environment, for example, was different. Who performs risk assessment? Basically, it is a two-pronged approach. The applicant has the primary responsibility of demonstrating safety, because it is his product. The regulator does not have a product of its own. The regulator will not deploy any technology to the market. It is the applicant or the developer who has the idea. He wants to improve to address a certain challenge. So it remains his primary responsibility to generate data. What the regulator needs to provide is the criteria for collecting that data. So the regulator will provide the guidelines, but the applicant will do the actual assessment and submit the data to the regulator. When you are talking about risk assessment in general, we are talking about both food safety assessment and environmental risk assessment. When it comes to food safety assessment, Codex already has published guidelines specifically for crops, and also guidelines specifically for foods derived from recombinant DNA animals. When you are looking at the issues of environmental risk assessment, it is basically guided by 3 guidelines, or 3. The first one is the protocol, what we call the Annex 3 of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. And we also have the guidance document of risk assessment of LMOs, which is a general guidance on the risk assessment for all LMOs. And lastly is a guidance document for engineered gene drives, which Dr. Haju has been able to cover in earlier presentations. When it comes to food safety assessment, food safety assessment is not looking at a scenario where you're looking at absolute safety of a food, but basically is to demonstrate that there's substantial equivalence between the GM crop or the GM animal that you want to introduce into the population vis-a-vis the one that is existing there. Because we might find an animal could have some inherent challenges. So you are not expecting maybe your technology will totally address those other challenges. So we are trying to compare that you're introducing versus the one that is already, that the populations already have. In terms of the parameters checked in food safety assessment, I think there are a number of parameters. First, you check the nature of the genetic modification, the molecular characterization, the health status of the animal, the issues of toxicology, the issues of allergenicity, composition of key nutrients, pathogenicity of the vectors, and potential intakes. So these are things that are quite elaborated in the Codex guidelines. So for a developer who would wish to release, for example, a GMO, would go specifically to the Codex guidelines and also the national guidelines to look what specifically the actual tests that are required to demonstrate, for example, your GM animal or the product do not have toxicity or allergenicity, or the compositional analysis has not been altered. When it comes to environmental risk assessment, this is basically an assessment or a process of identifying potential risks to the environment and establishing the level of risks and determining those risks that require measures for mitigation. It's basically a 5-step process, or the first 4 steps covers what would constitute risk assessment, and the last step is basically mitigation measures if there is any potential risks that has been identified in the first 4 steps. In terms of hazard identification, I hope I'm still on time. The first step is to where the risk assessor, and when I talk about the risk assessor, it also applies to the applicant, because I've said the applicant has the primary responsibility to demonstrate safety. So the risk assessor is asking himself on all potential hazards, and I've seen in the previous presentations from the previous speakers, trying to come up through consultations from the communities, the issues of concerns, and these are some of them that would relate to genetically modified animals. The issues of off-target effects. Maybe you want to change a gene, but through that change you could impact, or you could change another gene that you never intended. That's what we are calling off-target effects. The issues of non-target organisms, that you have released a GM to target a certain pest, but it also has an impact on other pests or on other organisms. The issues of horizontal gene transfer, genes moving from your GMO to another organism in methods that is not through pollination, for example. The issues of persistence and the issues of food web displacement. When it comes to step 2, it's basically to evaluate the likelihood of those potential adverse effects that were identified in step 1 happening. Of course, there is a criteria for assessing the likelihood from highly likely to highly unlikely, and there are parameters that are used to determine whether that likelihood is likely to happen or not. The step 3 is evaluation of consequences. And when it comes to consequence evaluation, it ranges from marginal consequence, which is the lowest level of consequence, to major consequence. When your regulators or risk assessors are looking at the issues of consequence, you are looking at a GM that would be ranging between marginal and the minor consequence. Otherwise, if you start going to intermediate and the major consequence, you are looking at a scenario where you have to look at that technology before it is deployed. When it comes to step 4, is where you are combining step 3 and step 2, basically looking at the issues of the likelihood, which is exposure, and the consequence. And when it comes to classification of risks, there are basically 4 categories of risks. Negligible risk, which is the desired risk that regulators would have no problem approving such a project. But if the conclusion of that assessment is high risk, the evaluators or regulators may not or would have difficulties approving such a project, because we are saying risk is unacceptable. But here it is, risk is very negligible. Step 5, I'm almost finishing. I'm told I have 2 minutes to wind up. Once you identify, you have done your assessment and you have concluded on the risk characterization, you have to provide, you have to make a decision on whether that risk is either acceptable or manageable or unacceptable. So if it is unacceptable, basically that project cannot be approved. But if it is manageable, you have to provide ways for mitigating that risk, and some of the strategies for mitigation of risks include confinement, conducting the research in a closed or confined environment, restricting access, or having small-scale release, maybe to observe or to collect more data, and possibly to do what we call monitoring. Once you release, you institute strategies for monitoring. And lastly, in consideration of the overall risk and the proposed mitigation, regulators have to make a decision. That exercise that you have done the estimation of risk and you have proposed additional mitigation, the final decision is basically informed by 3. The first one is what we call the food safety assessment conclusion, a conclusion on whether, based on the analysis, that the product or the GM animal is substantially equivalent to the non-modified counterpart. That's the purpose of the food safety assessment exercise. And in terms of an environmental risk assessment, you want to conclude, the conclusion should lead to what you call either negligible or low risk. And in some countries, they also, over and above these 2, the first 2 are basically risk assessment. Some countries also have socioeconomic impact assessment consideration. This is optional between countries. And based on those 3, the regulator can either approve your project to proceed. Of course, it will give conditions, or in most cases, it will give permit conditions. It can also reject. I know my earlier presenter said he doesn't want to say you can reject, but you can reject an application. A regulator can say this project, based on the analysis, cannot proceed. And the last option is the regulator can ask additional information before the final decision can be made.